Good evening, everyone. This is Dirk Garland Reads, and tonight, we're talking about Peacemaker for Hire by Clifford Blair. I received this book, well, rather bought this book from a library that was just selling some books that they had because they didn't want them anymore. It's a Western book, quite a few Westerns I've done already, and I've read a few Westerns already. Overall, it's a sort of heroic Western, like quite a few of the other Westerns I've read so far. Definitely nothing like Cormac McCarthy's Westerns, which are very grim and dark. I don't want to say grim dark because that's something else entirely, but that's besides the point. This book follows James Stark, also known as the Peacemaker, a sort of lawman for hire, a sort of bounty hunter, who is in this town called Guthrie. Yes, hello cat. The cat's here. And called Guthrie. That's where he's located. And it starts off with him tracking down a group of bank robbers to retrieve this bank's money. The great thing about this very short prologue is that, well, I mean, it's not necessarily great, but it's a complete foreshadowing of the entire story for the most part. Or you could say it's like the entire short story, but done in a much quicker manner without any of the sort of nuance and all that. He's the kind of guy who's had a lot of training. He's had some work with the Pinkertons, the real life group of quote unquote private investigators who in most recent news of last year were part of this massive scandal where Hasbro hired the Pinkertons to track down this wrongful shipment at this Magic the Gathering guy's house, was basically threatening him into handing it all over, which was such an insane thing. But that's not really that important to the whole story. James Stark is a very powerful character. He is very skilled. He's gone through lots of fights. Very clear. He's not completely invincible, but it does seem so at some points. But then he does fail more often than not. Like quite a few times, he straight up misses with his shots, with his rifle or his shotgun shells, shotgun blasts or whatever. He doesn't always, like, he doesn't just snipe them all with like a pistol from like 10 miles away. He can't do that. And he knows that, and instead he uses his mind, he uses tactics to ambush, corner, and find ways to whittle down bigger groups of opponents into more manageable size. You get that in the very prologue of the book, and you get that at the very end of the story, of like the last few chapters of the story, and it's really it's very interesting. He's much more about his intelligence than he is his killing ability. The other characters are Prudence McKay, a female lawyer who is a little bit of a love interest. They're kind of each other's love interest, but it's not like they get married or they share this kiss. There is this sort of understanding that, yeah, we kind of like each other, but it doesn't go much from there. But it's clear that they like each other. Another character is Houston, who is another lawyer who is a bit of a gunslinger, not as good as James Stark, and not as good as some of the other gunslingers you see in the book. However, he's still an upright man. And then the main antagonist is, a man called Dirk. Dirk is this retired outlaw who used to cause all sorts of havoc in Kansas before the law really caught up. And then he saw that it really caught up and it really started to establish itself, and then he realized, I can't do this anymore. So he went legit along with several of his men, which he hired on as part of a ranch. He's not exactly the most interesting villain. He does his job in the purpose of the story, and that's and it drives the plot. He's the main reason why James Stark goes out on a job in the first place, and he kind of drives it. But and then there's a moment they all meet, and it shows that he's a bit of a threat, but he's more of a threat with how he organizes his people rather than he himself being a very physically dangerous man. He's not exactly the strongest of his men, and he's not exactly the best shooter of his men. He's not the best sniper, gunslinger, knife fighter, fist fighter, or brawler. He's none of that, but he is a great organizer, and that's a very different pace for a villain. And so far, it's very different from quite a few of the antagonists that you find in some of the Western books, or at least the Western books that I've read so far. That makes a good change of pace. However, again, he's not exactly the best villain. He's serviceable at best. It's more about the situation and how James Stark and Prudence McKay navigate that situation and that problem. It's this one problem that crops up. It's not this epic, grand scale problem. That's something that I really enjoy about Westerns, particularly because it removes this, where a lot of fantasies or even sci-fi, they have this grand, epic problem that could destroy the world, the earth, or the universe, or something, or so forth, can really shake up everything. Whereas with Westerns, you do get that idea that everything's more on a personal level. While people might know each other and might have some interest in the things, in the grand scheme of things, nothing really changes. The world doesn't really change. It's the characters versus the world. And it's very similar in that way with Conan the Barbarian, in which Conan it's one man versus the world around him. Where Conan does eventually become a king of this massive nation, and he does shakes up a little bit of the world around him. It's more like the earlier stories in the kind of the chronology of Conan, where he's kind of just adventuring about everything's low stakes, and mostly low stakes in he could die or someone else could die. It's not this world-shattering event. And that's one thing that's really cool about Westerns in general. It's more smaller, low stakes, grounded, more personal. The only problem with that is that the characterization that I find with a lot of the Westerns are not exactly the best. They're more serviceable, they work for the story, and it's not exactly character driven. However, these are the more older Western books than the newer ones. I would assume that the newer Western novels have a bit more character in them. Even Jason Storm, or Storm in Paradise Valley, actually does have a little bit more character to it. As for the theme, consistent through line of an older crew of men that return to the business, and then they see that in the time that they're away from the business, they've grown a bit softer, they're not as good as they used to be, and that there's eventually someone that will eventually beat them and be better, will replace them. You get that with quite a few of the, like throughout the book. You get it with the whole idea that the Guthrie is becoming more civilized. There's more law that's coming into Guthrie, and you get the whole federal judge or federal attorney, I think that's what they call it, where he's trying to take down James Stark in the very beginning, but that doesn't really go anywhere. Not really. That's more of a way to introduce James Stark to Prudence McKay. And then there's another character kind of relationship bit where of James Stark being threatened by this desperado, the sharp, quick shooter that wants to take him down because he killed one of his friends. It's more about the reputation than anything. You get that with Wilson, you get that with the main antagonist, you get that with all of them. It also has this idea of brute force is not always going to win the day, and there's always going to be someone that's better at something than you are. It's a pretty cool story. Now, it's probably not going to be in print anymore because it's a serviceable Western at best. Not exactly the best characters, not exactly the most crazy of plots, though it doesn't need to be. But otherwise, it's a very serviceable Western, and it's not that long. The length of the book is just under 200 pages. The prologue's about 10 pages long. It's a decent Western, done by Avalon Books, the same publisher for Murphy's Gold. And it's just a pretty decent Western, and I would definitely recommend it. And so that's my review.